Jerome's follower is being followed, and Jerome's guns are flying in all directions. Episode 8 of Imagine by Bernard King and Nicholas Lumarine is becoming dangerous. The car was parked just along the road from the hotel, so he was still being followed. "I'm going home." Jerome spoke through the open window, jerking his follower awake. The thud as his head hit the roof was attenuated by the head lining of the small car. Rubbing his head, the driver opened the passenger door. "I'll give you a lift." The man's eyes were brown, tired, and were watering, and he sat with a slouch. With no piercing blue eyes and a number one haircut, Jerome felt safe as he squeezed in beside the enemy. Within half a mile, he wished he had taken the bus. The enemy's lips did not stop moving. He was a Cockney. His words slurred Jerome into an eye-closing trance. His assertion he knew nothing was obviously true. After a roll call of complaints of his life, strife, and wife, his question jolted Jerome from his half-slumber. "The posh-looking doll, she the other woman?" His glance at Jerome was at just the right moment to almost hit a cyclist. Already tight together in the small car, Jerome gripped his seatbelt as the car swerved, fearful his lurch might burst the door open. "If you like," he said. A vague reply always brought more questions, and the more his follower asked, the more he might give away. "You know, this job is different." The information poured forth. Usually he could guess whether he was working for a man or a woman, or a company or a couple, when his employer wanted to remain hidden. "Are you gay?" Jerome stiffened. It was impossible to move an inch away from any physical advance. "No," he snapped. "Married?" "Married? No." "Living with?" "No." Jerome frowned. The tide of information was going out instead of coming in. "See, that's strange too. You're not being naughty." "So why am I being followed?" asked Jerome. "That," the driver stared at Jerome again, but this time the road was clear, "is what I could ask you." They discussed motives and reasons, none of which fitted the situation until Jerome was able to release the pressure across his body by opening the door outside his house. "Cup of tea?" It was the least Jerome could offer for the lift. "Nah," the driver looked into his driving mirror. "Better not in case." "In case of what?" asked Jerome. "In case I'm being followed." The thought of his follower being followed made Jerome smile. "I'm not joking." Annoyance was the expression on the driver's face, Jerome decided. "I was followed yesterday. Obviously my boss, whoever it is, don't trust no one." Jerome's grin disappeared as the man drove off. What was that all about? Somebody following him, and now someone following the follower. He stood with his key in the lock, staring at his right toe poking away cracked cement on the doorstep, his thoughts suspended and blocking movement. Why was he so important to at least two unknown people? What did he have, or what was he doing, that was of so much interest? Trying to work out whether Nicholas was behind the follower was becoming complicated. There were too many emotional issues, and never having met the author made that problem a never-ending circle of question marks. Being followed for his gun collection had become a no-no. The sort of people interested in his weapons would have taken them the moment they were discovered. His life had taken a right turn into mystery. It was not wholly his anymore. Someone was spending time and effort on him. Someone did not do that for nothing. He found himself in the kitchen staring intently at his kettle, which he thought, considering his bewilderment, was as good as anything to stare at. Someone knew where he lived and where he worked. They knew his movements, and yet he was still being followed. The only conclusion that advertised was someone was expecting him to do something, or someone needed to know where he was each moment of the day so that someone could do something to him. Jerome's thoughts had hesitated. He traced their train back. Someone knew where he lived and where he worked. The word worked wriggled for attention. His work might be the attraction. He was a bank security guard. That title would be of interest to someone who was planning naughties. It was an angle he had not thought of. They could not know that the bank security guard in this case was simply signing people into a building and signing them out again in between looking at security camera screens. His bank was a head office. Hard cash had never crossed the threshold. Gangsters did not burst in with guns blazing to rifle the hot drinks machine. But it could be an answer to his followers. His decision to slip one of his pistols into his pocket the next morning had not been taken easily. Even if he shot someone whilst being attacked, it would open the door that could only lead to one place, the interior of a prison cell. He had run out of answers to his problem, which made trying to sleep even more difficult. None of his possible explanations really satisfied his imagination, an imagination that kept him awake until the worry hours, searching vainly for a juicy piece of fear to frighten him with. He did not bother speaking to his kettle or even his teapot at breakfast, deciding instead to have another chat with his follower to try and eke even a fragment of information out of him. His follower was asleep as usual as Jerome turned out of his garden and approached the car. The man's leap and the crack of his head on the roof was a satisfying start to Jerome's day. "I'm going to work. You can give me a lift or I can catch a bus," he smiled. The man's head shook for two reasons. First, to fragment the last vestiges of slumber, and second, to drown Jerome deeper in mystery. "Got to stay here. New instructions. Got to watch the house. You're off my radar." Suddenly, Jerome's bank ankle snapped off. Why should someone watch an empty house if he was to be a link to a bank robbery? It was his guns. Someone was after his guns. Or were they? The river of doubt swirled him along, spinning him in eddies of indecision and whirlpools of worry. It was not easy to find shop windows that reflected the view along the pavement behind him. The few he found established he was not being followed. All that day, the next, or the next. In fact, for the whole week leading up to the phone call. "Change of plan, Jerome, a change of plan." Because it was her, his heart thumped. Because it was her, his mouth dried. But his excitement dipped. There was an undertone of urgency. "Be sure, but be very sure you're not being followed." His spluttered question was flattened by her instructions. "Read your emails." It was not allowed at work, but he logged in immediately. The new address, the time the next day, and the orders to bring nothing with him told him Brighton was cancelled. But the coldness of the email was warmed by the last line. "With love, from the woman on the bus." Of course she would not give her name, and his reply was returned instantly as being undeliverable. The mail could not be delivered to an incorrect address. Apparently money was so powerful it could buy anything, even something that did not exist. Jerome thought he was getting used to surprises from Gemma. Jerome was wrong. To get to the meeting place, he had to squeeze between close-parked white vans, lorries that wanted to run over him, and hurrying workers whose tense and strained expression matched the tense and strained atmosphere that smacked him in the face at the entrance. Obviously, a bedroom could not be booked in the commercial centre. The place was bursting business. An overworked receptionist, still with a telephone in her ear and a bunch of papers pouring from her hand, led him to an impersonal door that matched the 20 other impersonal doors that matched each other on either side of the impersonal corridor. The office carried cost-saving to discomfort. Cheap prints, one for each wall, are much too small to look anything other than mean. A cheap desk, a cheap carpet, 2 cheap chairs, and a cheap telephone waited to depress the clients. Gemma's expression, looking up from the folder on the desk in front of her, telegraphed trouble. A kiss, or even a handshake, seemed out of place. Slowly, Jerome sat opposite her, trying to read between the tense lines on her face. With a finger on opposite corners, She spun and then pushed the folder across to him. What? His question was halted. Her finger was now pointing at the document. Read, she said. He read, and he tightened. His gaze could not scrape the words off the paper quickly enough. They tumbled into his brain, a jangling mass, igniting panic. Every sentence fitted, every paragraph mocked. The words curled out, imprisoning and shackling him. The killer words, hammering, gasping blows to his stomach, were the last two. To Brighton. She was composed. Of course she was. Of course she would be, he realized. She'd had the time to digest and fight the mind-bending thoughts that gripped him. His eyes flitted back over the page, over the familiar scenes, movements, and words. Gemma was married to a clairvoyant. No, that did not fit. This wasn't seeing into the future. This was mind-reading, but mind-reading on a superhuman scale. Nicholas was reading two minds at the same time, and his description of past scenes were reminders. Small, unnoticed incidents that leapt back to life because the author had reported them in detail. If it was not mind-reading, it must be eavesdropping. But eavesdropping was hearing, not seeing, and no one could hear halfway across London. So Nicholas must be with them, in the hotel, in the bedroom, in this awful office. It was the only answer. Gemma was married to an invisible man. The idea was stupid, but not so stupid as to prompt a half glance over his shoulder. Do you have any ideas? Her hand slipped across the desk and took his. The situation is unbelievable. His ring finger rippled across her knuckles in a soothing caress, a physical movement in contrast to his hardening thoughts. His army training was kicking in. If you couldn't hear or see the enemy, don't believe anything, but be twice as careful. So we must not waste time trying to believe it. He hoped his expression conveyed confidence. She was surprised. It seemed for once Jerome had taken the lead. We must work out what we're going to do about it. To Gemma, the answer was obvious. Nothing. There is nothing that can be done. As usual, she was back ahead of him. They could not change or control coincidences. She chose that word, she explained, because there was not another that described Nicholas's all-seeing, all-hearing powers. Whilst dumbfounding, they were not being harmed. There was no menace apparent, and the only disquiet was what they were creating. We will go to Brighton. Her firmness, confidence, and total control, whilst easing the tightness across Jerome's chest, was also unsettling. This was a problem he should be tackling, not Gemma. She stood up and moved around the desk, running her hands over his shoulders and pressing his head against the flatness of her stomach. And we will give him something to write about. He slid his hand around her waist, pressing her even nearer. She allowed him a moment of bliss before stepping back. But she leaned down and kissed his forehead. What have you been up to? His puzzled eyes prompted her second question. Why the follower? She rejected his answer before he could speak. It is definitely not Nicholas. When he's not writing, he's drunk and incapable. So I have to control his life. Followers have to be paid, and I hold the purse strings. By the way, I hired this office in your name. The black steel and the blue glint of his gun sprang forward as an explanation. Should he tell her about them? Although he had rejected them as a reason for being followed, she might see an angle that had hidden itself from him. No one had set foot in his armory. It had never entered his head anyone would. It was his world, secret and intensely private. But now there was more than silent guns hanging on the walls. There was Gemma, live Gemma, the woman he loved, and he should have no secrets from her. If it is not Nicholas, then I don't know. The lie was there before it could be stopped. Suddenly he was back 5 years. Suddenly, sorry was wounding again. Jerome? She was watching him. His pause had been too long. His stare, riveted on nothing, too obvious. What is it? This situation, he said. She did not believe him. She went back to her seat, colder than when she had left it. The tight pressure of guilt in his throat increased. No, he could not lie to her. Okay. 2 lungs full of oxygen help croak his secret out. I may have something someone wants. Like what? She asked the question 3 times on the way to his home. He did not answer. He could not answer. He was doing something he swore he would never do. But now he was committed. Her seeing would be her believing. Showing would be better than telling. She watched, bemused at his complications with his keys, fascinated by his security. But when the door of the back bedroom finally swung open and she stepped inside, Gemma Lumarine, for all her worldliness, for all her class, for all her wealth, staggered with astonishment. Jet-set Gemma suddenly crash-landed. Unblinking, she traced the lines of weapons, listened to his explanations and stories, popped her eyes even further when she saw the ammunition. Before, with the strength in her legs fading by the minute, she thumped into Field Marshal Montgomery's lap. "You're the only person who knows about this," said Jerome. "I think." The thought that occurred now was pretty certain his secret would go public on the next few pages of Nicholas's book. Oh my God! Her shout was not fired by fear. The blaze in her eyes had not been lit by terror. Reaching, she grabbed. Pulling him on top of her, Field Marshal Montgomery could not take the weight and toppled back. Kisses, like punches, landed on his lips, cheeks, and forehead. A frenzy of energy that was now in her hands was ripping and pulling at his clothes. They rolled, writhing and thudding across the floor. The Bren gun toppled down from its stand, became enmeshed with the clothes she was ripping off him. Gemma had gone. A tigress was everywhere, on top, beside, and behind him, her face contorted with passion as she savaged her clothes off. The raping began of each other. Love was pounded to dust on the floor beneath their colliding bodies. Sex was king, raw, violent, and brutal. Atop, her hair a wet curtain each side of his face, she stared, fierce intensity engulfing him as she pounded. Jerome, riding with her, suddenly missed a beat. Her stare was wrong. She was not seeing him. He looked through the parted lips, through her mask of sexual concentration, into the truth behind. She was gone. She was not with him. He could have sat on the other side of the room and not be missed. He was superfluous. This was just her, gorging herself with sex, greedily soaking up the emotion. His passion collapsed into mechanical movement. He was an accessory being used to the hilt. So he lay there, disappointment building, just a spectator, shut out by her unseeing stare. Her scream, so near, so high, so loud, startled, piercing his frustration. She heaved, thrust deeper, then, like a rag doll, collapsed on top of him. His arms went around her, a gentle and sliding embrace, a searching gesture, trying to touch something that was missing. This was what he had dreamed about. This was what he had wanted. But loving was giving, not taking. As if she could read his thoughts, she rolled off him. "I was too quick for you." He did not have time to answer. Her hands, her mouth, her body were suddenly attending to the gap in the performance. She had either taken a degree in sex or had plenty of experience. He laid back, stuffing his disappointment back into its bag and floating on rising passion. "Mr. Archer!" The shout bolted them upright. Someone was at the back of his house. His dash, a zigzag as he mangled his way into a shirt, took him to the other back bedroom window. "Mr. Archer!" Jerome's neighbour was standing on a pair of steps, about to descend into his garden. "We heard a scream." His neighbour paused, one leg over the fence. "It was a woman." The neighbour's wife was backing her husband up by holding the ladder. Jerome forced a laugh. "It was the radio. Sorry, it was a bit loud." "We thought you were killing someone." Jerome laughed at the non-existent joke, trying to cover his embarrassment. Their chat meandered on for a polite 3 minutes, the closing of the neighbour's back door ending their excitement for another year. Jerome closed the window. The perspiration trickled down his back as he thoughtfully stood gazing at nothing. Gemma, not wanting an ordinary affair, lassoed his thinking. Fighting to get at each other in a tangle of guns must be a little way towards her desires. His armoury was a mess. Field Marshal Montgomery lay on his side, a broken leg sticking sideways. The Bren gun was trying to wear his trousers, and his cushion had escaped the passion by dragging itself into a corner. Most of the guns were askew on their stands, and his grenade had bounced from the cabinet top, knocking the head off Winston Churchill before rolling across the floor. And there was something missing. He was the only body in the armoury. Gemma, the sexual generator, was missing. He waited a few pauses. She was probably in the bathroom. But his call, a moment later, rolled around an empty house. How long had he been with the neighbours? 3 minutes? She must have dressed, running down the street. He picked up his whiskey bottle, poured a large dose into his canteen, and hardly noticed as the raw spirit bounced a spasm in his stomach. He was still hanging on the hooks of disappointment. Intimacy was love, closeness, caring, and warmth, all adjectives that did not fit with Gemma Lumarine. And why should they? His question expanded his pool of depression, inviting him to fall in. It was obvious all Gemma wanted was a diversion, a change from the pressure of her drunken husband and a high-voltage life. He was something to play with, to dress up, to use as a vehicle for her fantasies, her toy soldier boy. She called him darling and love, but they were words of lipstick, rolling off lips that lied. "Mr. Archer!" The shout had bolted them both upright. Jeremy rolled away, grabbing his shirt, and dashed out of the door. Gemma scrabbled for her clothes, and in the downstairs hall slid into her dress, stuffing her pants, bra, and tights into her bag. She steadied herself before opening the front door and walking quickly, but not too quickly, down the short path and along the street towards the bus stop. That had been excellent. She was still wet in all the right places from the excitement. The guns, it had been the guns. She had never been so close to such power before, and she had not screamed like that for years. Relaxation warmed around her, making even the sparse upholstery of the bus seat comfortable. Jerome was good for her. He had been the right choice. His trial period was over. She took out her telephone and switched the silence off. His name was not on her called list. That was good. He was not a leech like the last few trial lovers. She replaced the phone and crossed her arms, giving herself a quick cuddle of congratulation. Everything was coming to place. Now it was time for Jerome to start earning his keep. The Brighton threesome and Nicholas attacks in the next episode of Imagine in 2 weeks.